Hello and welcome to The Big Picture. I'm Tracy Shilshi. Now, leaders of the ASEAN grouping on Sunday formally created a unified economic community larger than the European Union. It's a move that could bolster economic ties with India and give it greater access with a market whose combined GDP is $2.57 trillion. Prime Minister Narendra Modi was in the audience as 10 leaders of the Association of the Southeast Asian Nations formally signed the 2015 Kuala Lumpur Declaration on Establishment of the ASEAN Economic Community, or as we'll be calling it, AEC. The ASEAN members have already taken several steps, such as the removal of tariff barriers and visa restrictions to make this a reality. And to help us understand what India can gain from this ASEAN Union, we have in studio this evening Mr. Ajay, who's the former Secretary of the Ministry of Commerce and Industry. We also have with us Professor Amita Batra as well from the Center for South Asian Studies at JNU. And we also have, of course, consulting editor with the Business Standard, Subhomoy Bhattacharjee as well joining us from the capital. If I could come to you, Professor, first, talking about this AEC, it's, it's a community that was envisaged perhaps in 2002, correct me if I'm wrong. It's been a while, of course, since then. If you could take us through a brief look into what has taken so long into making this a reality?
It was envisaged in 2002 as an objective to be achieved by 2020. But in 2007, when ASEAN was celebrating its 40th anniversary, they preponed the entire objective to achievement in 2015. And since 2007, they have been very, they have been at the process in terms of trying to achieve various objectives and various targets that would take them towards achievement or formation of the economic community. And today, when they have achieved this, basically it's a declaration towards the formation of an economic community, which is yet an unfulfilled task. There is much in the sense of at least 20% of the overall task of economic community yet to be achieved or attained. So it's basically a laying out of the path for the future, whereby they ascertain, that as of today, they announce that they are going to move towards very, very constructively towards the accomplishment of an economic community in the region.
All right. Mr. Dua, we'll speak about, of course, of the challenges, of this big community and, its comparison, of course, with the European Union and all that. But first of all, your thoughts really on how this is going to be bolstering India. Perhaps, people are calling it's going to be a new innings really for India as far as ASEAN nations are concerned. Do you agree with that?
For India, Southeast Asia has always been a very important territory, both in terms of trade as well as strategic-wise. Before I get into that, I would concur with what has just been said, that this Asian economic community is still work in progress. There has been a declaration more to cover up what could not be achieved rather than has been achieved. It's been now deferred by at least 1 year from December. Otherwise, by end of 2015, this AEC was to be in position. Now it looks like an intent that we are declaring it's been formed, but actual creation is being postponed by at least 1 year to end of December 2016, to end of 2016. And if the second document, which has been signed day before or yesterday in Kuala Lumpur, it's actually saying clearly that it's going to come into being in 2025, not 2016.
Yes.
So till then, and that's by when there would be market integration. Probably what would be achieved by next year, and it was said that about 20% of the work remains of what was envisaged. That's to the first step of it, which was to have freer movement of goods, services, and skilled labor. In that, 20% or 21% of the work remains, but integrating into a common market where there wouldn't be any barriers to movement, like there wouldn't be any customs unions, there will be a customs union, etc.
Yes.
And certainly without the currency union, which is there in the European Union, that I think is still some time off, and they themselves, the members themselves, have put 2025 as the goal for it.
All right.
The India's benefit in others, we have now time to prepare. We have time to take forward several things which we've been talking about for the region. And in that, I would like to refer to, as we go along, to the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, which includes 10 nations of the ASEAN countries and 8 others today who are summit members. They're getting together and forming a larger body where we would have much greater, at least, trade benefits.
All right. Subhomoy, if I could come to you and, taking on from what Mr. Dua and, of course, the professor here said, this again seems to be something that sounds so great on paper when, in reality, it's still a far-off dream. Like several other projects that we're seeing, at least as far as the economic policies of this government is, do you think that kind of criticism could be coming its way?
Well, I heard what Mr. Dua had to say, and he put it very right, that this has been deferred. So there is a lot of those issues there. But what I would say is that this has to be read along with the TPP and obviously the RCEP. The Asian region is now the most intense region in terms of economic cooperation, in terms of trade issues, in terms of so many other factors that need to be handled, and these countries are moving their integration, and this integration means not just this particular group, but it means that the TPP also becomes that much closer to reality. So for India to say that it's business as usual and that we will have time to prepare would possibly be taking a bit more risk than we should be at this time. We risk being shut out of the program of economic integration that Asia is moving towards, and I mean East Asia and Southeast Asia, and that is what India should be very closely monitoring and gearing its domestic economic policies to cohere to.
All right. Professor, keeping all that in mind as well, and also talking about the formation of this particular AAC, and we of course saw how a lot of world powers also reacted to the BRICS Bank, saying that of course it's a great move and all that, but a lot of people also came up with this suggestion that this is one front which is now gaining a bit of power, and this is the world balance as far as economy or money is concerned is somehow tilting a bit. Is that something you agree with the formation of the AEC as well?
Yeah, as I think has been said by both the other speakers, let me just bring it together, to say that as far as ASEAN Economic Community is concerned, it basically brings the ASEAN region together into a single market and a competitive production base. That's the idea of creating a single production base which is competitive. And what that really means is, that they not only create trade facilitation by eliminating the barriers at the borders between countries, but also within countries. So ultimately what this means is facilitating the movement of goods along in terms of the production networks that are within ASEAN. So India has a huge advantage at this time. I wouldn't really agree with Mr. Dua, when he says that this is time for us to prepare. This is time for us to get integrated, with the ASEAN. Once we are integrated with the ASEAN, that's the centerpiece of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which is really the centerpiece of the regional, which is the centerpiece as far as Asian economic integration in a larger context is concerned. And that directly acts as a counter to what is the US-led initiative in the region, which is the TPP. So one has to see it in terms of bits and pieces that add up to the larger whole. That would really be, in the context of what you were saying, that is as far as power balances, balancing across the world is concerned. In that context, it's very important to realize, that this would mean that you have the rise of what we have started to call, or the world has started to refer to as the Indo-Pacific region, India, ASEAN, and the +6, with China, Japan, Korea, Australia, and New Zealand. It's really the, the core of that's coming into being now with the ASEAN Economic Community. And the 20% that is yet to be fulfilled, towards which they are saying, they would move towards in 2025. That's really more to do with the socio-cultural and the political aspects. The economic has already been achieved in terms of 80%. The rest of 20% is difficult because that deals with the domestic barriers, but that is what is really going to create the core of this shift of economic power to the Asia-Pacific, and within that, the Indo-Pacific region.
All right. Mr. Dua?
I wouldn't like to sound pessimistic about it. It's a good idea.
Yes.
All that I'm saying is that it has lagged behind its own schedule, and the enthusiasm, political enthusiasm in the region, the countries of the region, which is required to bring about greater economic integration amongst the APEC countries, the AEC countries themselves, that is not sufficient for the time being. The production basis of all these countries have to get to be linked together, which means there has to be freer flow of capital, which as of now hardly any step has been taken.
Okay.
The European Union, probably, or earlier, if you recall, there used to be what used to be called European Economic Community. It managed to emerge because there was a common historical bond. That's the trauma of the two world wars, which all these countries have suffered together. So that spurred them to form a common market large enough to be able to take care of kind of things which they had experienced earlier. I think when I referred to the political support which is required in the region, probably is not there as of now, because there's no common historical bondage, the bond. But certainly as the economies grow, which they are, and they are realizing that this particular region does need to become a counterbalance to countries like China, which otherwise are going to be dominating the entire area, it is necessary for them to get together. And that is where I think this region is also looking forward to India to also be playing a role, a much more major role than it has played so far, to act as a counterbalance, so that between the two parts of this area. And it is in that context it's being talked of Indo-Pacific cooperation. But I will just point out, communication-wise, whether it's a road communication, railways and others, we are much more kind of conducive to a South Asian economic community rather than a Southeast Asian. Let me stop at that. We'll take this further.
All right. Subhomoy, bringing you in, the core so far, as far as India and ASEAN's partnership is concerned, has been economic. And, especially after this visit, I've been reading a lot of reports, I've been reading a lot of opinions, of course, from not just the industry, not just from the industry, but also from political observers, that this, is perhaps the shift that India would be looking at, not just being an economic, not just trade, but it could also bring in a new dimension. It could probably, bring in, boost perhaps political and diplomatic cooperation as well between the grouping. Do you agree with that?
That's right, Tracy. In fact, if you look back, as the professor was pointing out, the Indian connection with Asia started a bit late, and we have really been sort of getting gradually adjusted to the idea of being part of a super Asian network. Now, one of the reasons, as Mr. Dua pointed out, is that the economic integration has been lagging the timetable that they themselves had set, is because of the fact that this region is a host to a large amount of political differences. These countries among themselves have differences ranging from being dictatorship to democracy like India, which so it is a huge differences to be able to traverse. But at the same time, the ASEAN's record in terms of being able to create a dynamic and to create an attractive position for the world to take notice of has also been very sharp. And in this context, I would again come back to what it means for India, that now for a company setting up shop in India would have to consider not only what is on offer from the respective Indian states, but that company would also be looking at what is available just across the border. Now, this is a very big challenge. South Asia, the the community, the SAARC community, despite its promise, has underperformed. But the community that is the ASEAN is a very strong counter magnet. We've already heard companies saying that we would like to shift to Vietnam, to Philippines, and this community, this pressure could actually get accentuated in the days ahead if we are not able to keep pace with the movement that this creates. Asia is now the most happening event theater in the world economy. And to that extent, it has to be understood how we are able to react to these developments.
All right, Mr. Dua would like to respond to that, yes.
We must just examine today's intra-country trade levels in the Asian economic community. Only 26% of the trade of these countries is amongst themselves. For each of them, Japan, China, US, Europe continue to be much bigger players in trade. A motive which compelled European Union, EEC, to convert it to a European Union, to have a common currency and various kinds of things was there was much greater trade.
Which currently in fact stands at
60-odd%.
Yes.
Or there.
Yes.
So that is where the need for much greater political enthusiasm amongst the people of the country, residents of these countries, is required if we have to make it as an effective kind of I'm not calling it a balancing factor by itself, but an effective economic community.
All right. Professor?
Yeah, just a small point, I don't think the economic community has ever envisioned that they want to move towards a common currency. The economic union is not the objective of this economic community. At the moment, it rests at only achieving economic community aspects, towards which it has moved at a very significant pace, which is more than any other in the region at least, So it's a very successful experiment in that sense. Two, what has been mentioned earlier, that they haven't had a common factor or a common holding factor, Again, there, as far as the EU was concerned, it was basically the post-World War II scenario, and the France and Germany coming together.
Yes.
In this case, it's been a very, very important, significant factor in terms of, not allowing communism to spread in this region. That's why the initial US alliance, as far as this region is concerned, So there has been a common underlying factor even for the initial 6 in the case of ASEAN. The other, that is the 4 which are developmentally, a little backward, Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, Vietnam. Those have also started to integrate with the production networks in this region. Those that are shifting from China are coming to Vietnam. We have recently announced our initiatives in the last budget, towards these 4 countries. So we are very keen on taking over as far as infrastructure opportunities in these newly emerging economies within this context is concerned. So for us, it becomes very important, that we start looking at this region in terms of how to get integrated within. And as far as trade is concerned, the 26 to 28% within is larger than what we see within South Asia, So one can never see South Asia, which has been stagnant for the last more than 30 years now,
Okay.
As far as within the region integration is concerned, India necessarily needs to look east, and act east in terms of putting its own house together, in terms of domestic economic reforms. So in this context, and plus, what are the imperatives that are being created by the slowing down of what Mr. Dua is saying is the traditional markets for these countries, the West basically, they're all slowing down. Still uncertainty as far as Eurozone is concerned.
Yes.
The US recovering at a very slow rate, The imperatives are for the Asian region to look within and strengthen these networks, And that is where the economic community objective, the remaining that, is envisioned for the next 2 years and taking it forward, that becomes very, very significant. And India's association alliance in this economic integrated unit, becomes very significant.
And we also see how China's markets can actually affect the entire world as far as, their economy and markets are concerned. Just talking, of course, Subhomoy, about this particular AAC and leaders of the grouping, as I've read, they are yet to address politically sensitive areas, and some of them, being agriculture, steel, automobile production and things like that. Are we getting too much into the nitty-gritties, considering the fact that, this is a reality that's perhaps going to be happening in the next 10 years or so? But still, I mean, these are some issues which are yet to be addressed, according to you.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that they are unaware of what's to be developed, because most of these countries, their political differences, as Professor rightly pointed out, was a major reason why they wanted to have a united face against the Chinese behemoth. And today, with the fact that China is such a large player in the international scheme of things, and particularly in the ASEAN region, they would naturally be very keen to ensure that, you know, what are the low-hanging fruits, those are gathered up very fast. So those which are going to be difficult, they would rather keep it aside. And ASEAN's track record has been that they have been able to deliver in terms of what they've been promising, largely in terms of the fact that this ASEAN group itself was not expected to survive. In fact, EEC was supposed to be much more powerful. But as you've seen today, that EU today has much more questions about it, because of the fact that they went in with a currency union without going for a fiscal union.
Yes.
You know, all those things. Whereas ASEAN is actually a much more robust organization and is delivering much more, as you say, bang for the bucks than EU is.
Okay. Or perhaps learning from the mistakes of the EU, you never know. I mean, you know, looking at, of course, how things are.
The two are very different experiments, you know. I mean, that has moved on its own track in a very different, you know, on a very different kind of a trajectory. And this is moving very differently. And one has to realize, you know, that as far as ASEAN is concerned, they have been very capable in the sense of keeping aside their conflicts. It's not as if political conflicts do not exist.
Yeah.
They exist, but they've allowed the ASEAN organization to create a conducive atmosphere for economic development, which can counter the original threat that they had from China, you know, so to say. So in that sense, you know, ASEAN has been a far more successful organization in allowing the economic process to work on its own, even though that has been separately led by the market, you know. So in that, you know, one has to realize that ASEAN has worked successfully in this context. And as far as your, you know, the question about politically sensitive sectors are concerned, there is automobiles, there is agriculture. In services, there is aviation, there is movement of professionals, you know.
Yes.
All of that are very difficult, which we've encountered when we have negotiated our FTA with them beyond the goods aspect, you know, where we've talked about services liberalization. And that is the aspect that's remaining as far as their own integration is concerned. This is what they have to move forward. This is what they have to show that they can achieve, you know, in the next whatever years they've outlined for themselves. It's only when they achieve that, you know, that it's going to be a successful economic community.
All right. All right. With that, of course, yes, Mr. Dua, very quickly.
We signed in 2012,
Yes.
which marked 20 years of our actually getting a status, first the dialogue partner status and thereafter a summit status, an FTA which could cover only services and investment, not goods, because there was a degree of opposition, etc. I still remember very clearly that point of time from a couple of prominent countries, including where the headquarters is located. Now it's become effective from July 2015, though we signed.
Yeah.
We are optimistic that now that it's been signed, we would see a much greater offtake of increase in our trade, etc., which we have now put it as almost $200 billion,
Yes.
up from the current $76 billion. That is because we realize that it is good to be a part of, or good to join with a bloc which is seeing economic buoyancy of a kind which was seen only post Second World War in Japan or Taiwan, at that time called Taiwan, and some of the other parts of it. The point I'm trying to make in this context is not that we are not going to benefit, or that it's not, is that we have hitherto been sitting on the fence on a lot of political issues, and that has been putting off many members of APEC, saying that India has not been taking unequivocal
political enthusiasm in the right direction. That is, of course,
necessary
what is required
for us.
That's, of course, wrapping up this debate. Mr. Dua, thanks so much. Professor, thanks so much. And Subhomoy, thanks so much for joining us again here on The Big Picture. Of course, join us again tomorrow for another topic. But for the moment, that's it from me, Tracy Shilshi. Thanks so much for joining us.